Hey everybody. Today we're going to talk about Chapter 20, Section 4, which is the Columbian Exchange, and also we're going to talk about a new economic system called Mercantilism. So today I have with me my Liverpool mug. I have a nice, warm, comfy Irish cable knit sweater, and we're going to talk about some history. So this cable knit sweater from Ireland is an export. And a lot of what we're going to talk about today has to do with imports and exports. With the Columbian Exchange, we're talking about how goods and products traveled back and forth between the New World and Europe. There was a huge benefit for both the New World and Europe. Europe got a whole bunch of new things that they'd never had before, like tomatoes and squash, chocolate, and especially potatoes and corn. Potatoes are just hugely valuable for Europe because they're easy to grow. They grow in a tremendous variety of circumstances. They're really hard to kill off. The potato crop just keeps going and going and going. And in addition to that, what you get from potatoes, it's a whole lot of energy, a whole lot of calories. So if you think about what you can get out of a potato in terms of French fries and things like that. A potato has a ton of calories, a ton of energy that you can use, and it's easy to grow. The population is going to boom, largely because of potatoes. The New World suddenly had a whole bunch of animals that they'd never seen before, like horses and cattle and sheep and pigs. And in addition, products that they had never seen before, like bananas, wheat, and rice. So you can imagine the benefits to both civilizations of this Columbian Exchange. But the tragic part of the Columbian Exchange was the spread of, yeah, you figured it out, COVID-19, right? Diseases. Smallpox came to the New World and it killed probably between 70 and 90% of the population of North and South America. Europe was hit by some horrible new diseases too. Time for a funny story. So my first year teaching at my high school, boy, this is a story, all right. I had read a book recently about how while diseases had gone from Europeans to Native Americans, there were also some diseases that went from North America back to Europe. And these diseases also were brand new to people, and they killed a whole bunch of people that in North America they wouldn't have killed because those people had a reaction that allowed them to survive. They were able to fight off the disease. One of Christopher Columbus's crewmen got this disease, brought it back to Europe, spread it around to a whole bunch of people, and it ended up making you lose your hair. You start drooling and urinating uncontrollably. It causes your nervous system to start twitching quite a bit, and eventually it will kill you. Nobody could figure out what to call this disease. At first, the Spanish called it the Portuguese disease, the French called it the Spanish disease, the English called it the French disease, the Germans called it the English disease. Everybody pinned the blame on somebody else. And then an author wrote a play about a shepherd who gets the disease and dies tragically. The shepherd's name was Syphilis. Now, I told my freshman class that story, and this kid from the back row raises his hand. He was one of those kids that always wore the really baggy clothes. The shorts were halfway down to his knees. The hat was on sideways, gold chains. And we'll call him Matt. So Matt raised his hand, and I said, "Matt, do you need to say something?" He said, "Yeah, Mr. Curry, I had shots for that." I said, "What?" He said, "Yeah, syphilis." I said, "No, you must be thinking of something else. You must be thinking of measles or chicken pox or polio or something." He said, "No, it was that. I just can't talk about it." I thought, you just did, in front of the entire class. That is super awkward. So, like 6 months later, he's in the hallway, he sees me, and he says, "Hey, Mr. Curry, you remember that whole syphilis thing?" I said, "Yeah, I do." He said, "I got it wrong. It was tetanus. I had shots for tetanus." I'm like, okay, well, you're probably going to want to tell a whole bunch of people that, because right now everybody thinks you had syphilis. So, yeah, first year teaching. Fun times. So these diseases went back and forth. The whole reason that people like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, that whole generation, the reason that they wore powdered wigs on their heads was because it became really fashionable to do it, because syphilis had made so many people bald that powdered wigs became fashionable to cover up that you had syphilis. Now, most people did not have syphilis, but it just became fashionable to make it look like you were wearing a powdered wig. Yeah. So all these changes meant that there had to be a brand new economic system to cope with the differences. One new idea that developed was called capitalism. And the guy in charge of explaining capitalism to the world really was this weird, nutty Scottish professor named Adam Smith. And he wrote a couple of books about it. The Wealth of Nations was one of the most important books to explain capitalism. And that came out in 1776. So, The Wealth of Nations. The idea behind capitalism is that if you've got extra money lying around, you could invest that money in a company. And whenever that company makes a profit from selling stuff, you, because you own shares in that company, you will get a share of the extra leftover profit. So using money that you invest to get more money out of it. That's capitalism. With more money around, though, Europe got hit by a case of, that's right, you know it, what happens when the value of money goes down because there's too much supply of money? It's called inflation. So, many investors would join together to form these things called joint stock companies. Today, we call them corporations. But originally they were joint stock companies. Just on a little aside, there was a company called the South Sea Company, and they promised everybody that if you invested in their company, you bought shares of stock, that you would get a share of the profits from all of the fleets they had all around the South Atlantic and the South Pacific, and that they would be trading in huge amounts. But the problem was they never actually decided to buy any ships. Selling stock was so successful for the company, that's all they did. They took in the money from new investors and paid off their original investors from that, and then just kept selling stock. And eventually, people found out that the South Sea Company wasn't anything but a scam, because they weren't making any money from anything but new investors. And everybody lost all the money that they had when public confidence went out in what's called the South Sea Bubble. The bubble burst and the economy crapped out. So companies like corporations, joint stock companies back then, started colonies like Jamestown in Virginia. Jamestown is named for the King of England at that time, King James I, the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, from a previous episode, and the second cousin of Queen Elizabeth, the person who was in charge before King James. There was a brand new theory in European economics called mercantilism, or mercantilism. I've heard it pronounced both ways. Mercantilism is the idea that your country is only as rich as the amount of gold and silver that you're holding onto in your treasury. Why is that? So here's the deal with mercantilism. Back then, in the 1500s and the 1600s, you didn't have a permanent army all the time. Your country did not have a navy or an army that was operating 24/7. What would happen is you would, if you suddenly were in a war, you'd raise a couple of thousand peasants to join together in these ramble regiments. kind of very poorly organized and poor quality with no training. But mostly what you do is you'd hire professional soldiers who went to the highest bidder, called mercenaries. So your country needed to pay mercenaries. If you were the country of the war who ran out of money first to pay the mercenaries, then they would switch sides. And you would lose the war, because all those mercenaries would still want a paycheck. So your country needs to hoard as much gold and silver as possible at all times, because you never know when a war is going to break out. And also, once war is declared, you can't trade like you used to anymore. You can't start accumulating gold and silver in wartime, because trade breaks down. So during peacetime, you need all the gold and silver you can get to pay your mercenaries so that you don't lose the war. How do you do that? How does your country accumulate more gold and silver than everybody else? Well, you need to make stuff in your own country and export it to everybody else and demand gold and silver from them as payment. But there's a problem here, because if your country has that philosophy, but all your neighboring countries also have that philosophy, that they don't want to buy things from other countries because they'll have to pay gold for it, and you want to sell as much as you can to other countries because you're getting gold for it, nobody's going to want to trade with anybody else. Nobody wants to buy from their neighbors. And you need people to buy from you if you're going to accumulate gold and silver, right? So that's a problem with mercantilism. Over time, it kind of freezes the economy. It freezes global trade because you all want to have more gold and silver than everybody else, so you're not willing to buy from others. The way that you would accumulate more gold and silver is to sell more than you buy, right? And this is what's called a favorable balance of trade. There's your blanks there. You want your country to have a favorable balance of trade. But if everybody wants to have a favorable balance of trade, nobody's going to be buying. So how do you sell things? Well, you get people from your own country to move to new unpopulated regions. Or maybe there's a population of natives there, but there's no Europeans there. What do we call it when European countries set up these places that they own? These territories that they own outside of Europe? Those are their colonies, right? And so Europeans wanted to set up colonies everywhere because the colonies do something really good for you. Two things that are really good for you. They will provide resources for you, raw materials, wood. You might even open up gold or silver mines there in the colony. But wood and all kinds of other stuff that's valuable for your country back in Europe, you take those resources from the colony, bring it back to the mother country in Europe, the imperial headquarters, and you turn those products into something, into some finished product, some manufactured product. And then, because nobody in Europe wants to buy your manufactured product, you send it back to the colony, and they have to buy their finished products from you. They were the ones who gave you the raw materials, and then they have to buy the finished product from you in gold and silver. So countries started colonies so that they could build up their gold and silver supplies and their natural resources. All of this led to limited but important economic changes in Europe, capitalism and mercantilism. This included the rise and importance of towns and cities, and also the rise of a new merchant, urban, middle class living in those towns and cities. And that, my friends, is Chapter 20, Section 4. See you soon for Chapter 21, Section 1.